The air in the Hollywood studio was thick with anticipation, the kind that buzzed like static before a storm. It was late October 2024, and the Jimmy Kimmel Live set glowed under harsh lights, its polished stage a stark contrast to the gritty undercurrents swirling backstage. The audience, a mix of tourists and locals, clapped rhythmically, their laughter canned and predictable. But tonight felt different. Word had spread Joe Pesci, the legendary actor known for his explosive roles and no-nonsense demeanor, was the guest. At 81, he was a rare sight on late-night TV, and his appearance had sparked whispers of something big. For the over 55 crowd in the audience, many of whom had grown up quoting Goodfellas and Casino, this was a moment of nostalgia laced with curiosity. Pesci wasn't here to promote a new film. So why now? Backstage, the green room smelled faintly of coffee and hairspray. Joe Pesci sat on a leather couch, his small frame coiled with a quiet intensity. His silver hair was neatly combed, but his eyes, sharp, unyielding, scanned the room like a hawk. Across from him, a young production assistant fidgeted with a clipboard, avoiding his gaze. The walls were lined with framed photos of past guests, their smiles frozen in time, but the atmosphere felt anything but celebratory. Joe's manager, Lou, leaned in close, his voice low. "You sure about this, Joe? You don't have to go out there guns blazing." Joe's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "I'm not here to play nice, Lou. People need to hear it straight." Lou sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. He'd seen Joe like this before. When he was set on something, there was no talking him down. The clock ticked closer to showtime, and the faint hum of the audience grew louder through the walls. On the other side of the studio, Jimmy Kimmel was in his dressing room, adjusting his tie in the mirror. At 57, he was a late-night institution, his boyish charm and quick wit a staple for millions. But tonight, his usual confidence was tinged with unease. He'd heard the rumors. Joe was upset, something about comments Jimmy had made on air weeks ago, calling out Hollywood's obsession with rebooting classics like Home Alone. Jimmy had laughed it off, saying, "Even Pesci can't save that one again." It was a throwaway line, meant to jab at studios, not Joe. But word got back, and Joe wasn't laughing. Jimmy's producer, Carla, knocked and poked her head in. 5 minutes, Jimmy. You good? He flashed a grin, but it didn't reach his eyes. Yeah, just another night, right? Carla hesitated. Joe's intense tonight. Stick to the script, okay. Jimmy nodded, but as she left, he muttered under his breath, "Great. Just what I need." The show began with its usual fanfare, Jimmy's monologue, a few jabs at politicians and pop culture, the audience eating it up. The over 55 crowd chuckled at his quip about Social Security, a nod to their daily reality of rising costs and shrinking benefits. But as the monologue wrapped, the energy shifted. Jimmy introduced Joe, and the applause thundered, laced with a nervous edge. Joe walked out, his steps deliberate, his navy suit crisp against the stage's bright lights. He shook Jimmy's hand, firm, maybe too firm, and sat down. The audience leaned forward, sensing something raw beneath the polished surface. "Joe Pesci, everybody," Jimmy said, his voice warm but cautious. "Man, it's an honor. You're a legend." Joe nodded, his expression unreadable. "Thanks for having me, Jimmy." The first few minutes were standard. Jimmy lobbed softballs about Joe's career, the roles that defined a generation. Joe answered, his voice gravelly but steady, anecdotes about De Niro and Scorsese drawing laughs. But the air felt heavy, like a fuse burning down. The older audience members, many retired or nearing it, watched closely. They'd seen Joe's characters take on corruption and betrayal with a fire that felt real, and tonight, they sensed that same fire simmering. Then, Jimmy pivoted. "So, Joe, you've been pretty quiet lately. What's got you fired up these days?" Joe leaned back, his fingers drumming on the armrest. The studio went quiet, the hum of the lights suddenly noticeable. "You want to know what's got me fired up, Jimmy? Truth. Or the lack of it." Jimmy blinked, his smile faltering. "Truth? Okay, that's a big one. Care to elaborate?" Joe's eyes locked onto him, sharp as a blade. "You sit here every night talking to millions, and you throw out words like they don't mean nothing. You call people out, make your jokes, But where's the line? When do you stop and say, maybe I got it wrong? The audience stirred, murmurs rippling. Jimmy shifted in his seat, his tie suddenly too tight. I'm not sure I follow Joe. This about something specific. You know damn well what it's about, Joe said, his voice low but cutting. You called me out on your little show, made it sound like I'm some has-been who can't keep up. And you didn't even have the guts to say it to my face. The crowd gasped, a mix of shock and excitement. For the older viewers, this was more than drama. It was a confrontation that echoed their own frustrations with a world that seemed to dismiss their experience, their values. Jimmy's face flushed, but he kept his tone light. Whoa, Joe, I think you're misreading that. It was a joke about Hollywood, not you. I'm a fan man. A fan. Joe's laugh was dry, humorless. Don't give me that. You're selling stories, Jimmy, and you know it. You twist things to fit your narrative, and people eat it up because they don't know better. But I do. The stage manager, off camera, signaled to cut to commercial, but Joe wasn't done. He leaned forward, his voice steady but fierce. You called me a liar indirectly, and I'm here to set it straight. You don't get to rewrite my life for a laugh. Jimmy opened his mouth, but no words came. The audience was riveted, the older ones especially, their faces a mix of awe and unease. This wasn't the scripted banter they'd expected. It was raw, unfiltered, like a scene from one of Joe's films. The lights seemed hotter, the studio smaller, the faint scent of sweat and cologne mingling with the tension. Joe, I'm sorry if it came off that way, Jimmy finally said, his voice tight. Let's talk this out, okay? No cameras, just us. Joe shook his head. Not good enough. You want to fix this? Start with the truth. Right here, right now. The stage manager's voice crackled through an earpiece, urgent. Jimmy, we're cutting to break. Now. Jimmy stood, forcing a smile. All right, folks, we'll be right back after this. The lights dimmed, the audience buzzed, and Joe stayed seated, his gaze never leaving Jimmy. Backstage, producers scrambled. Phones lit up with texts, and Lou whispered to Joe, You sure you want to keep going? Joe's jaw tightened. I'm just getting started. As the commercial break rolled, the studio felt like a powder keg. The older audience members whispered to each other, their voices a mix of disbelief and admiration. They'd spent decades watching a world change too fast, politicians dodging accountability, media spinning half-truths. Joe's stand, whether right or wrong, felt like a rebellion they understood, a refusal to be sidelined. Jimmy retreated to his dressing room, splashing water on his face. Carla was there, her expression grim. What the hell was that, Jimmy? You didn't warn me he was this pissed. I didn't know. Jimmy snapped, then softened. Okay, I knew he was mad, but not like this. What do I do? You go back out there and fix it, Carla said. He's not wrong, you crossed a line. Own it. Jimmy stared at the mirror, his reflection older than he felt. He'd built a career on being likable, but tonight, likability wasn't enough. He thought of his audience, especially the older ones, who'd trusted him for years. Losing them wasn't an option. Back on set, Joe sipped water, his calm exterior masking a storm. He wasn't here to destroy Jimmy. He respected the guy's hustle, even admired it once. But respect didn't mean silence. Not when words cut deep, not when they painted a man as something he wasn't. Joe had spent a lifetime fighting stereotypes, too short, too intense, too Italian. And he'd be damned if he let a late-night host reduce him to a punchline. The stage manager counted down. 3, 2, 1. The lights snapped back on. The audience hushed. Jimmy returned, his smile gone, replaced by something raw. Welcome back, folks. Joe, I owe you an apology. Joe raised an eyebrow, waiting. The crowd held its breath, the air thick with the scent of anticipation and the faint creak of seats. Outside, Los Angeles hummed, car horns, distant sirens, a city that never slept. But in here, time stopped. Jimmy took a breath. I messed up. That joke about Home Alone, it wasn't about you, but I see how it landed. I should have been clearer, and I'm sorry. Joe studied him, silent. The older audience leaned in, their faces etched with years of hard-won wisdom. They knew apologies, real ones, fake ones. They wanted to believe this was real. Finally, Joe spoke, his voice softer but firm. Words mattered, Jimmy. You got a platform most people dream of. Use it to lift people up, not tear them down. Jimmy nodded, his throat tight. I hear you. Can we start over? Joe paused, then extended a hand. Maybe. But you gotta mean it. They shook, the audience erupting in applause, a release of tension that echoed through the studio. But Joe's eyes held a warning. This wasn't over, not yet. He'd said his piece, but trust was earned, not given. As the show wrapped, the older crowd filed out, their voices alive with debate. Joe's right, too many lies out there, one man said, his Vietnam vet cap tilted back. Jimmy's okay, but he's got to watch it, a woman added, her purse clutched tight. They carried the story with them, a spark in a world that often felt dim. Backstage, Joe slipped on his coat, ignoring the chaos of producers and assistants. Lou walked beside him, quiet. You think they'll get it? Lou asked. Joe shrugged, stepping into the cool night air. The city stretched before him, lights flickering like promises. Don't matter if they get it tonight. It's a start. The door closed behind him, but the story didn't end. Not here, not now. Something had shifted, and the echoes would linger on airwaves in conversations, in hearts that still believed one voice could make a difference. The confrontation on Jimmy Kimmel Live had gone viral before the credits rolled, clips circulating on X, headlines screaming, Pesci calls out Kimmel. For the over 55 crowd back home, flipping through their feeds on outdated iPads or catching late-night reruns, it was more than gossip. It was a stand against a world that seemed to rewrite their heroes for clicks. Joe's breath was steady, but his mind churned. He'd said what he came to say, laid it bare under those blinding lights. Jimmy's apology felt sincere enough, but sincerity was cheap in this town. He'd seen too many promises dissolve like cigarette smoke. As he reached his car, a black sedan parked under a flickering street lamp, Lou broke the silence. You stirred up a hornet's nest, Joe. X is blowing up. Half the people think you're a hero. Half think you're unhinged. Joe slid into the driver's seat, the leather creaking under his weight. Let them think what they want. I didn't do it for likes. Lou hesitated, then climbed in beside him. I know, but this ain't the 90s. You call someone out, it's a war online. You sure you're ready for that? Joe's hands tightened on the wheel, his knuckles pale. I've been through worse. The drive to his hotel was quiet, the city blurring past, palm trees casting jagged shadows, billboards hawking movies he'd never watch. But something gnawed at him, a feeling he couldn't shake. It wasn't just Jimmy's joke or the sting of being misjudged. It was bigger, like he'd cracked open a door to something he hadn't meant to face. Not yet. Back at the studio, Jimmy Kimmel sat in his dressing room, the door locked, a half-empty water bottle dangling from his hand. The mirrors reflected a man who looked older than he had an hour ago. The applause had faded, but the weight of Joe's words lingered, heavy as the stale cologne in the air. His phone vibrated on the counter, texts from his team, his wife, even a few comedian friends. You okay? Hell of a show. Pesci's intense, man. He ignored them all. Carla burst in, without knocking, her clipboard gone, her face tense. Jimmy, we've got a problem. He groaned, rubbing his temples. What now? More tweets. Worse. She held up her phone. A grainy video paused on the screen. Someone leaked footage from the commercial break. You and Joe off mic. It's already got 1 million views. Jimmy's stomach dropped. He grabbed the phone, hitting play. The video was shaky, clearly shot from the audience, Joe leaning forward. His voice low, but audible. You think this is a game, Jimmy? You're part of the machine, and you don't even see it. Jimmy's response was clipped, defensive. I'm just doing my job, Joe. Lighten up. The clip cut off as the stage manager waved for the break to end. Jesus, Jimmy muttered. Who leaked this? Doesn't matter, Carla said. It's out there. And it's not just X. Local news is picking it up, framing it like you dodged accountability. The older demos eating it up. They're calling it Hollywood's mask slipping. Jimmy stood, pacing. I apologized. On air. What do they want from me? Carla crossed her arms. They want real Jimmy. not your polished, I'm sorry routine. Joe tapped into something people are tired of spin, especially the ones who've been around long enough to see through it. He stopped, staring at her. The older audience, his parents' generation, his neighbors in their 60s, the folks who watched his show while balancing checkbooks or worrying about Medicare, had always been his backbone. If they turned on him, it wasn't just a PR hit. It was personal. All right, he said, his voice steadier. I'll fix this. I'll call Joe, set up a private talk. No cameras, no bullshit. Carla raised an eyebrow. You think he'll go for it? He's gotta, Jimmy said, but doubt crept into his tone. He remembered Joe's eyes on stage, unyielding, like they could see through walls. This wasn't a man who settled for half measures. The next morning, Joe woke to the smell of coffee and the distant clatter of housekeeping carts. His hotel room overlooked downtown, a sprawl of glass and concrete under a smoggy haze. He'd slept poorly, dreams fragmented with old arguments and faces he hadn't seen in years. At 81, sleep was a luxury, but last night's adrenaline still buzzed in his veins. He flipped on the TV, muting it as a news anchor mouthed something about Pesci's tirade. The ticker mentioned declining trust in media, a stat that hit home for the retirees and veterans watching at breakfast tables across the country. Joe didn't care about polls, but he cared about the truth, or what was left of it. His phone rang. Lou, Jimmy's people called. Lou said, without preamble, he wants to meet. Off the record, just you two. Says he wants to make it right. Joe stared out the window, a pigeon landing on the ledge. Where? Neutral ground. Some diner in Burbank, tomorrow noon. You in. Joe's jaw tightened. He didn't trust diners, too many eyes, too many phones. But he trusted running away even less. Yeah, I'm in. The diner, called Rosie's, was a relic from the 50s, checkered floors, red vinyl booths, the faint smell of grease and pie crust. Joe arrived early, his cap pulled low, and took a corner booth. The jukebox played Sinatra, soft and tinny, blending with a clink of forks and low chatter. The clientele skewed older, gray-haired couples, a few solo regulars nursing coffee. They reminded Joe of his parents' friends, people who valued a straight answer over a slick one. Jimmy walked in at noon sharp, no entourage, just a hoodie and jeans. He looked tired, his usual polish dulled. He slid into the booth, the vinyl squeaking. Thanks for coming, Jimmy said, his voice low. I didn't expect all this. Joe sipped his coffee, black and bitter. You didn't expect me to call you out, you mean? Jimmy winced, but didn't back down. Fair. I screwed up, Joe. That joke wasn't personal, but I get why it felt that way. I'm trying to do better. Joe studied him, the lines around Jimmy's eyes deeper than on TV. You think one lunch fixes it? You're part of a system that chews people up, spits them out, and calls it entertainment. I've seen it my whole career. Jimmy leaned forward, his voice earnest. I'm not the system, Joe. I'm just a guy trying to make people laugh, maybe think a little. But I hear you. I've leaned too hard into the easy shots. Let me make it right. What do you want? Joe set his mug down, the ceramic clinking softly. Stop hiding behind your desk. You got a platform, use it. Tell stories that matter, not just ones that sell. Jimmy nodded slowly, like he was weighing every word. Okay, I can do that. Starting with you. Let's do another interview, no script. You set the terms. Joe's eyes narrowed. You think I'm here for airtime? No, Jimmy said quickly. I think you're here because you care. Same as me. The diner hummed around them, waitresses calling orders, a kid dropping a spoon, the jukebox shifting to Dean Martin. Joe felt the weight of the moment, the chance to walk away or dig deeper. He chose the latter. All right, he said. But it's not just about me. There's a kid out there, someone I've been mentoring. Young actor, talented, but the industry's crushing him. You want to do right? Give him a shot on your show. Jimmy blinked, caught off guard. A kid? Who? Name's Marcus Reyes, Joe said. 23, grew up in the Bronx, same as me. He's got a story, poverty, loss, the works. But he's not a sob story. He's a fighter. You put him on, you let him speak, you'll see. Jimmy hesitated, then nodded. Deal. I'll have my team reach out. But Joe, why him? Why now? Joe's gaze drifted to the window, where sunlight glinted off passing cars. Because I was him once. And someone gave me a chance. The twist 2 days later, Jimmy's team tracked down Marcus Reyes, a lanky kid with sharp eyes and a quiet intensity. He arrived at the studio nervous, but ready, his script tucked under his arm, a monologue about growing up in a neighborhood where dreams were a luxury. Jimmy met him backstage, shaking his hand, promising a fair shot. The show went live, Marcus's segment second after the monologue. He stepped onto the stage, the lights hot, the audience curious. His voice started shaky but grew steady, painting a vivid picture, cracked sidewalks, his mother's overtime shifts, the music that kept him sane. The older crowd leaned in, their faces softening. They knew struggle, knew resilience. But as Marcus spoke, something shifted. He paused, his eyes flicking to Jimmy, then the camera. I wasn't going to say this, he said, his voice dropping. But Joe Pesci didn't just mentor me. He saved me. Last year, I was on the edge, debts, no work, ready to quit. Joe found me, gave me a place to crash, told me to keep going. But he's not what you think. The audience stirred, sensing a shift. Jimmy's smile froze. Joe's not just some tough guy from the movies, Marcus continued. He's been funding a program, quietly, no press, for kids like me. Acting classes, scholarships, second chances. He doesn't talk about it because he doesn't trust people like. He hesitated, then pointed to the desk. Like you, Jimmy. People who turn truth into a segment. The studio went silent, the air thick with shock. Jimmy's jaw tightened, but he stayed quiet, letting Marcus finish. The older audience gasped, whispered, Joe Pesci, a philanthropist? It was a revelation that flipped the script, a secret hidden in plain sight. Marcus stepped back, his chest heaving. I'm here because Joe believed in me. But I'm not here to play nice. You want real Jimmy? Start with why nobody knows the good Joe does. Start with why we only hear the fights. The applause was slow at first, then thunderous. Jimmy stood, clapping too, but his eyes were distant. Backstage, producers scrambled, unprepared for the curveball. On X, the clip exploded. Hashtag Pesci Truth trending. Posts from retirees and grandparents hailing Joe as a hero, not a hothead. After the show, Joe watched the replay from his hotel, alone. He hadn't asked Marcus to say any of that. Hell, he told the kid to focus on his own story. But Marcus had a fire Joe recognized, the kind that burned through lies. Joe's program, a small nonprofit he'd started a decade ago, was never meant for headlines. It was personal, a way to give back to the streets that shaped him. Now it was out, raw and unfiltered, and he wasn't sure how to feel. His phone buzzed. Jimmy. Joe, why didn't you tell me? Jimmy's voice was quiet, no trace of his usual charm. Didn't need to, Joe said. Wasn't about me. Jimmy paused. Marcus threw me under the bus out there. But he's right, I've been coasting. I'm going to change that. Starting with a segment on your program, if you'll let me. Joe leaned back, the city lights flickering outside. You want my trust, Jimmy? Earn it. Put kids like Marcus front and center, not as props. Do that, and maybe we'll talk. He hung up, the room silent except for the faint hum of the TV. The news ticker scrolled. Pesci's secret charity shocks Hollywood. Joe turned it off, his reflection caught in the dark screen. He'd come to call out a lie, but somehow he'd spark something else, a conversation, messy and real, that wouldn't fade with the next cycle. Outside, Los Angeles pulsed, indifferent but alive. Joe didn't know where this would lead. More scrutiny, more fights, maybe more hope. But for the first time in years, he felt the weight lift, just a fraction. Not an ending, but a beginning. And for the older folks watching, the ones who'd seen too many promises break, it was a spark. Not a fire yet, but close. The weeks following Marcus Reyes's bombshell on Jimmy Kimmel Live were a whirlwind, not just in Hollywood, but across the living rooms where the over 55 crowd gathered, their coffee mugs steaming as they debated over morning news. Los Angeles hadn't changed. Its streets still buzzed with ambition and exhaust, its skies a hazy gray, but something had shifted in the air, subtle yet undeniable. Joe Pesci's confrontation with Jimmy Kimmel, once a fleeting scandal, had morphed into a broader conversation, one that resonated with those who'd spent decades navigating a world that often felt stacked against them. Retirees in Ohio diners, veterans in Arizona VFW halls, grandparents in Florida condos. They all saw Joe not as a celebrity, but as one of their own, someone who'd called out the noise and demanded better. Joe stayed out of the spotlight, holed up in a modest rental in Santa Monica. The house smelled of old wood and sea salt, its windows catching glimpses of the Pacific's restless waves. He'd turned off his phone after the first flood of calls, reporters, producers, even a few old co-stars, all wanting a piece of the story. His nonprofit, Second Chance Arts, was now public knowledge, its quiet work funding acting workshops and scholarships for kids from places like the Bronx, Newark, and South LA. Joe hadn't meant for it to be a headline. It was just something he did, a way to balance the scales after a life of luck and grit. But Marcus's words had ripped the curtain down, and there was no going back. He sat on the porch one morning, a chipped mug of espresso in hand, the air cool with the promise of November. The distant crash of waves mingled with the squawk of gulls, and for a moment, he could almost forget the chaos. Almost. Lou had left a stack of letters on the table, fan mail, mostly from older folks. One caught his eye, handwritten in shaky cursive from a woman in Pittsburgh. Mr. Pesci, you reminded me that truth still matters. My husband and I watched your films when we were young. Now, we watch our grandkids struggle. Thank you for giving them hope. Joe folded it carefully, his throat tight. He wasn't used to this, being a symbol. He just wanted to set one thing right. Meanwhile, Jimmy Kimmel was grappling with his own reckoning. His studio dressing room, once a sanctuary of laughter and quick fixes, now felt claustrophobic, the mirrors throwing back a face etched with doubt. The leaked clip from the commercial break still haunted him, its raw edges replayed on X and cable news until it became a meme, a shorthand for caught out. His older audience, those loyal viewers who'd tuned in since his Man Show days, hadn't abandoned him, but their emails carried a new tone, disappointment, tempered with expectation. You're better than this, Jimmy, wrote a retired teacher from Iowa. Prove it. He'd spent days replaying Joe's challenge. Use your platform to lift people up. It wasn't just about Marcus or Joe's program. It was about the stories Jimmy chose to tell, the ones he'd glossed over for a cheap laugh. He met with his writers, a young crew who thrived on viral moments, but didn't always grasp the weight of their words. We're changing things up, he told them, his voice firm. No more punching down. We find the real stories, people fighting for something, not just trending hashtags. Carla, his producer, watched from the corner. Her usual skepticism softened. You mean it this time, don't you? Jimmy nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah, I've got to. Their first move was Marcus. Jimmy's team had stayed in touch, not just for damage control, but because the kid's monologue had struck a chord. Marcus wasn't polished, wasn't media trained, and that was the point. He was real, scars, dreams, and all. Jimmy invited him back, not as a guest, but as a collaborator, to help shape a segment on Second Chance Arts. No scripts, no filters, just Marcus talking about the kids he'd met through Joe's program, the ones who'd found a voice through theater when the world told them to shut up. The taping was set for a crisp December evening. The studio decked out in subtle holiday lights, a nod to the season without overwhelming the mood. The audience skewed older tonight, their faces lined with years of hard-won wisdom, their applause warm but expectant. Jimmy walked out, his tie looser than usual, his smile less rehearsed. Welcome, folks, he began, the familiar cadence grounding him. Tonight's a little different. We're not here to roast anyone or chase laughs. We're here to listen. He introduced Marcus, who stepped into the light wearing a simple black sweater, his posture straighter than last time. The crowd clapped, recognizing him from the viral clip, but their eyes held curiosity, not judgment. Marcus didn't sit, he stood, pacing slightly, his hands gesturing as he spoke. I grew up where nobody hands you anything, he started, his voice steady. My mom worked 3 jobs, and I still heard gunshots most nights. Acting wasn't a dream, it was survival. A way to be someone else when life was too heavy. Joe Pesci saw that in me, in a lot of us. His program isn't just classes, it's a lifeline. He paused, glancing at Jimmy, who nodded, silent. But it's not about Joe, Marcus continued. It's about the kids still out there, the ones nobody sees. Like my friend Elena, 16, writing plays about her mom's deportation. Or Ty, who got out of juvie and found poetry. They're not headlines. They're people. And they're why I'm here. The monitors flashed images, not glossy promos, but raw photos from Second Chance Arts workshops. Kids laughing, rehearsing, crying, growing. The older audience leaned forward, some wiping their eyes. They knew these stories not from TV, but from their own lives, their own kids, their own fights. The scent of popcorn from the concession stand mixed with the hum of the studio's air system, grounding the moment in something tangible, human. Jimmy stood, joining Marcus center stage. "I've been doing this show a long time," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "And I've made mistakes, said things that hurt, even when I didn't mean to. A few weeks ago, Joe Pesci called me out, and I'm glad he did, because it led to this." He gestured to Marcus, to the screens. "This is what matters. And we're going to keep telling these stories, starting now." The applause was thunderous, not just for Marcus, but for the shift, the promise. Backstage, Carla exhaled, her clipboard forgotten. For the older viewers at home, watching through bifocals or crowded around a single TV, it felt like a small victory, a crack in the cynicism that had settled over their world. But the story didn't end with applause. 2 days after the broadcast, Joe got a call, not from Lou or Jimmy, but from Elena, the 16-year-old Marcus had mentioned. Her voice crackled through the line, nervous but determined. "Mr. Pesci, I saw the show. I wrote something. For you." Joe, sitting in his rental's cramped kitchen, the smell of burnt toast lingering, frowned. "For me? Kid, I don't need poems." "It's not a poem," she said. "It's a play. About you and that TV guy. But not the fight, the after. What it started." Joe froze, the weight of her words sinking in. He'd come to Kimmel's show to settle a score, to call out a lie. He hadn't expected this, a ripple that reached kids he'd never met, kids who saw not just his anger, but his hope. "All right," he said gruffly. "Send it over." The script arrived by email, typed in messy font, all 60 pages of it. It wasn't polished, but it was alive, dialogues that cut deep, scenes of a fictionalized Joe and Jimmy, not as enemies, but as two men stumbling toward understanding. The climax wasn't a fist fight or a speech, but a quiet moment. The two sharing a coffee, admitting their flaws, promising to try again. Elena's note was simple. "I wrote this because you made me believe one voice can change things. Even a little." Joe read it twice, the pages spread across his table, the ocean's roar faint through the window. He didn't cry, he wasn't that guy, but his chest ached, a mix of pride and something he couldn't name. He called Marcus that night. "You know this Elena kid?" Joe asked, no preamble. "Yeah," Marcus said, cautious. "She's good people." "Why?" "Her play," Joe said. "It's something. Get her to workshop it with your group. I'll cover the costs." Marcus laughed, surprised. "You serious, Joe? You hate publicity." "This ain't about me," Joe snapped, then softened. "It's about her. About all of them." Months later, Jimmy Kimmel Live aired a special episode, not in the studio, but at a small theater in Hollywood, the kind with creaky seats and a single spotlight. The marquee read, "One Voice" by Elena Morales. The audience was mixed, industry types, local families, and a heavy contingent of older viewers, their faces glowing with anticipation. Joe sat in the back, cap pulled low, unnoticed. Jimmy was there too, not as host, but as a guest, his laughter genuine as Elena's play unfolded. The performance was raw, sometimes stumbling, but it held the room captive. Lines about truth, about second chances, landed like punches, softened by moments of humor and grace. The older crowd saw themselves in it, their fights, their losses, their stubborn hope that things could still change. When the actors took their bows, the applause shook the walls, echoing into the night. Jimmy found Joe outside afterward, the air cool, the streetlights casting long shadows. "You didn't tell me you funded this," Jimmy said, no accusation, just wonder. Joe shrugged, lighting a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his face. Didn't need to. Kid did the work. Jimmy hesitated, then extended a hand. "We good, Joe." Joe took it, his grip firm, but not crushing. "We're getting there." They parted ways, no cameras, no crowd. Joe walked to his car, the city alive around him, horns blaring, laughter spilling from bars, the distant pulse of a bass line. He thought of Elena's play, of Marcus's fire, of the letters still piling up at home. He'd started this to right a wrong, but it had grown beyond him, into something he couldn't control. And for the first time, that felt right. At home, the older viewers flipped off their TVs, their hearts full, their minds racing. They'd seen a story that didn't end with a neat bow, but with a door cracked open, a reminder that even in a world of noise, one voice, one choice, could start something new. Not a revolution, maybe, but a step. And for them, for now, that was enough.